Driving across the desert at night feels like stepping into another world. The vast emptiness stretches on forever, the only company being the stars above, twinkling like distant lanterns and the endless ribbon of highway. I've always loved driving. There's something freeing about the open road, but that night was different. It was late December, a cold winter night. I was driving from Albuquerque to Phoenix, a route I'd taken a couple of times before, though always during the day. But this time, my schedule hadn't worked out, and I found myself driving after dark. I was supposed to be excited. It was my last trip of the year, and Phoenix meant seeing friends and good weather, but as the miles ticked by, I started feeling uneasy. I don't know if it was the isolation or the way the roads seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, but something about that night felt wrong. My car, a 2012 Subaru Forester, was reliable. It had seen me through countless road trips, and I never had to worry about it breaking down. But as the fuel gauge dipped closer to empty, I started to feel the first twinges of anxiety. The stretches of I-40 in this part of New Mexico are lonely, just miles and miles of blacktop and desert with no gas stations or towns for what feels like hours. I remember glancing at the clock on the dashboard. It read 10:12 p.m. The highway was empty, no headlights in the rearview mirror, no taillights ahead. Even the stars, which had been so bright earlier in the night, seemed dimmer now, obscured by a thin layer of clouds. That's when I saw it, a faint glow on the horizon, just barely visible against the dark landscape. As I got closer, the glow turned into a flickering neon sign, its red light cutting through the night like a beacon. Finally, I muttered to myself. I didn't even care how sketchy the place looked. I needed gas, and this was my only option. As I pulled into the lot, the first thing I noticed was the sign. It read "Last Stop Gas" in faded red letters. The NGAS flickering on and off as if it might give out entirely at any moment. The station itself looked ancient. Two rusted gas pumps stood out front, their paint chipped and peeling. The lot was uneven, with patches of cracked asphalt barely visible beneath a thin layer of frost. A single bulb hung above the station's entrance, casting a dim yellow glow that barely reached the edges of the lot. I parked next to one of the pumps and stepped out of the car. The air was frigid, biting at my face as I zipped up my jacket. The wind whistled softly through the desert, carrying with it the faint smell of oil and something metallic. As I started filling up the tank, I glanced around the lot. The place was completely deserted. No other cars, no movement. Just silence. I felt exposed standing there like the darkness was watching me. Once the tank was full, I decided to go inside to pay and maybe grab a coffee to keep me awake for the next leg of the drive. As I walked toward the entrance, the faint crunch of my boots on the frosty pavement sounded unnaturally loud. The inside of the store was just as dilapidated as the outside. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly and the shelves were half empty, stocked with expired snacks and dusty soda bottles. The air smelled faintly of cigarettes, and a battered refrigerator hummed loudly in the corner. Behind the counter stood an old man. He was tall and thin, with a weary frame and skin that looked like it had been weathered by years of sun and wind. A gray trucker hat sat low on his head, and his eyes, dark and sunken, were fixed on me the moment I stepped inside. "Pump 3, I said, placing a $20 bill on the counter. The old man didn't move at first. He just stared at me, his face completely expressionless. "You don't want to keep going west tonight," he said suddenly, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The words caught me off guard. I blinked at him, unsure if I'd heard him right. "What, you don't want to keep going west tonight?" he repeated, his tone colder this time. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping into my chest. "Why's that?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Zombies. Ghosts." The old man didn't smile. Instead, he shook his head slowly and said, "Turn around or you'll regret it." There was something in his eyes, something dark and heavy, like he was staring right through me. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't a threat. It was final. My mouth went dry as I stood there, trying to figure out if he was messing with me or if he truly believed what he was saying. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice a little quieter now. The old man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked into the back room, leaving me standing there alone. I walked back to my car, my mind racing. His words played over and over in my head. "Turn around or you'll regret it." Was he trying to scare me? Was it some weird prank? Or did he know something I didn't? I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel and staring out at the empty road ahead. Every logical part of me wanted to brush off his warning as nonsense. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Finally, with a deep breath, I made my decision. I turned the car around and started driving east. About 40 miles later, I spotted a small roadside motel called the Desert Oasis Inn. Its flickering vacancy sign and peeling paint didn't exactly inspire confidence, but it was late, and I was exhausted. Room was small and cold, with a thin comforter on the bed and a rickety heater that barely worked. I fell asleep almost immediately, too tired to dwell on the strange encounter at the gas station. But the next morning, everything changed. As I sat in the lobby sipping a bitter cup of motel coffee, a headline flashed across the TV screen. Landslide shuts down I-40 near Flagstaff. Multiple cars caught in collapse. My stomach dropped. The footage showed a massive pile of rocks and debris covering the highway. Several cars had been caught in the collapse, with at least one fatality reported. It hit me like a punch to the gut. That landslide had occurred exactly where I would have been if I hadn't turned around. I don't know how the old man knew what was going to happen. Maybe he'd heard something on the radio I hadn't. Maybe it was just a gut feeling. Or maybe it was something else entirely. To this day, I can't explain it. But every time I drive through New Mexico, I think about that gas station and the warning that saved my life. Sometimes I wonder how many others ignored his advice.